È uno storico, un saggista, è un filosofo, la migliore mente del XXI secolo per qualcuno. Yuval Noah Harari, israeliano, ci racconta che cosa siamo. Ci ha raccontato che cosa siamo stati soprattutto, perché il primo libro è stato sul passato, il secondo è stato sul futuro, adesso ci racconta il presente. 21 lezioni per il XXI secolo.
The 21st century. I would say that the equation that defines the 21st century is that if you have enough biological knowledge, enough computing power, and enough data, you can hack human beings. Humans are now hackable animals. If somebody has enough information and computing power, they can know us better than we know ourselves. And that changes everything. The economy, society, politics. It could lead to the creation of paradise or hell. It could lead to the creation of the most unequal societies in history, of the most extreme totalitarian regimes in history. But again, the key idea is to realize that very soon somebody outside us will have the power to know us better than we know ourselves and to manipulate us like never before. Scholars like me say that so far this is the best time to be a human being. It's because we see that we have managed to overcome famine and to overcome plagues, which were the two biggest enemies of humankind throughout history, and that human violence is also at a historical low. Today, more people die from eating too much than from eating too little or from violence, which is an amazing achievement. And it's all because of the enormous power that science and technology has given us. But exactly this power also constitutes an enormous danger. If we begin to misuse the power, instead of using this power to cure diseases and to prevent famine, prevent plagues, we start using it for bad purposes, then it could lead to more violence than ever before, and it could lead to less freedom and more totalitarian regimes than ever before. It's the same power used in different ways. History all the time changes, and what were the main concerns in the past, gradually the situation changes. You know, like 400 years ago, you go back to the 16th and 17th century, so everybody in Europe is concerned about the big battle between Protestants and Catholics, the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. Now, today, almost nobody cares about it. I mean, even the religious people, they don't care so much about this division. We just moved on. The biggest danger now facing people all over the world is irrelevance. In the 20th century, the big problem was what happens if I'm exploited by some powerful corporation or government. Now the biggest danger, what happens if I'm irrelevant? They don't need me anymore. Maybe the only thing they need about me is data about me. It's much harder to fight against irrelevance than against exploitation. When you are exploited, at least they need you. They need you to work in the factory or to be a soldier in the army. But when you are irrelevant because there is a machine that does everything better than you, then you can hardly even rebel because you don't have power. So this is one of the reasons that the division between left and right is becoming less relevant. And the big question really becomes the global versus local and national issues, because I think that we can't solve any of our major problems without global cooperation. But then global cooperation threatens the identities of many people. So we now see this tension. Now, if you look at the biggest problems of the world, I would say there are three big problems today in the world. There are nuclear war, or the potential for nuclear war. There is ecological collapse, and especially climate change. And there is technological disruption. The rise of artificial intelligence and the rise of bioengineering, which is going to completely disrupt the economy, the society, even the human body. Now, you can't do anything about these three problems on the national level. Italy by itself cannot prevent nuclear war. Italy by itself cannot prevent climate change. No matter what policies the government will adopt, unless it cooperates with the US and Germany and China, it won't be enough. And similarly, if you think about the technological disruption, so there are many reasons to fear the rise of artificial intelligence if it is not regulated. But there is no way that the Italian government can regulate artificial intelligence or data processing by itself. If you look at the 20 biggest technology companies in the world, none of them is Italian. Actually, none of them is even European. They are either American or Chinese. You have to cooperate with other countries. It doesn't mean giving up independence. It doesn't mean giving up local culture or opening the borders to immigration. But it does mean that you have to think beyond the national level and take actions to encourage global cooperation and not national isolationism. Humankind or Europe will not be destroyed by waves of immigration. They could be destroyed by nuclear war or climate change or technological disruption, not by immigration. There have been even bigger waves of immigration in the past, and humankind survived quite fine. But it is a serious problem. It's not an easy problem. I think the main thing to remember about immigration is that this is exactly the sort of thing that democratic politics is good at solving. Basically, I would say that it would be wrong of any government to have a policy on immigration which is against what the majority of the population wants. You cannot force immigration on an unwilling population. Absorbing immigration, is a long-term process which requires the cooperation of at least the majority of the people. If you don't have that, it's not going to work very well. On the other hand, it's also extremely worrying to see that in different parts of Europe, extreme politicians are inflating fears of immigration far beyond what the real problem is, and they are using it to undermine the democratic system, basically saying, you have to give me all the power in order to save the country from this existential threat. And this is extremely dangerous. And you see it even in countries like Hungary. They hardly have any immigrants. I mean, nobody almost wants to immigrate to Hungary. And still they have many more Hungarians are immigrating out than people coming into Hungary. And still you have this large part of the population convinced that they are facing this existential threat. And it's actually utilized to undermine the democratic system. So this is a very problematic situation. Globalism is not about abolishing nationalism. I don't think there is any contradiction between nationalism and globalism. If you think that nationalism is about hating foreigners, then yes, you can't have both. But nationalism is about taking care of your compatriots. And that today, you need global cooperation to take care of your compatriots. So you need to be a globalist in order to be a good nationalist. And the best example is the World Football Cup, that you see, teams from all over the world. Nobody is abolishing nationalism in the World Football Cup. But in order to have a football competition, everybody needs to agree on the same rules. I mean, if the French play football by one set of rules and the Argentinians or the Croatians by another set of rules, it can't work. So, and what you see is that you have people from Argentina and France and Italy and Japan coming together in Russia to play a game, everybody accepting the same rules. And you can be extremely nationalist and love your national team and wave the flag and so forth, and still you play by global rules. Liberal democracy has been, Hitler said it's dead, and Stalin said it's dead, and it's still alive. Not so well. It is in a crisis, but it's still alive. The great thing about liberal democracy is that it is the most flexible system of government that humans have ever managed to create. It's a system that can absorb criticism, can acknowledge its own failures, and can reinvent itself. It did so again and again in the 20th century, and this is why it survived, whereas fascism and communism collapsed. Also, if you look at the core liberal values, they are today stronger and more widespread than ever before in the history of the world, even in places like Russia. I mean, there is a simple, test to know whether you are a liberal. Not liberal in the narrow sense, like in the United States, the Democrats are liberals. In the deep sense, liberalism comes from liberty, freedom. It's the idea that people should be free to decide for themselves. So in the political field, for most of history, people thought that power comes from the gods or is inherited by kings. Liberalism says no. People should have the freedom to choose their own government. Now today, more people believe that than in any previous time in history. Even in Russia, they hold elections. Maybe it's a sham elections, but even them pay lip service to this ideal. If, like, a politician wants my vote, I would ask that politician, if you're elected, what actions will you take to lessen the risks of nuclear war? If you're elected, what actions will you take to lessen the risks of climate change and ecological collapse? And if you're elected, what actions will you take to lessen the risks of disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence? And then the fourth question is, what's your vision for the future of the country and of humankind? Where do you see humanity in 30 years? A politician that is unable to answer this question, or a politician who keeps talking about the past and is unable to formulate a meaningful vision for the future, I won't vote for such a politician. In interview with Sebastian Kurz, the chancellor then in Austria, and we raised these questions and he gave his own answers. I mean, you can accept them, you cannot accept them, but some politicians are at least engaging with these issues. I met Emmanuel Macron, I met Angela Merkel, and they are thinking about these issues and are trying to formulate answers. As a historian, I know that the past wasn't fun. You wouldn't like to go back there. And in any case, you can't. It's impossible. If your vision for the future is going back to the past, then I don't think you should be leading any country.